share with you a bit of information about landscape impact programs. Bear with me while I prepare the slideshow. I'm coming to you from the central coast of New South Wales, otherwise known as Awabakal country. It's contested with the Darkajing community as well. However, it's a beautiful day here, and I look forward to sharing what we've learned in the last 6 months. So as mentioned by Rachel, yes, we're Regen Farmers Mutual. We have our farmers are our members, which are our owners. That gives us a unique position of representing farmer interests as opposed to shareholder interests who might be third party. We're looking at the carbon market as you guys are. We see one of the biggest changes coming down the track of the Scope 3 mandatory reporting, which will kick in July 1st, 2024. Now, what that means is that farmers, instead of just having a tangible grow a ton of wheat, sell a ton of wheat, get paid for a ton of wheat, not only will they get paid for what they produce in terms of food and fibre, but they're also going to be either paid or penalised based on how they impact the climate and environment through that production of their commodity. And you can start to see that in carbon already, with emissions coming through and premiums being paid for carbon neutral beef and wheat and wool. But you'll see it following with biodiversity. We can see that in Australia with the Nature Repair Bill coming through, and it's very much modelled on the ERF and the carbon market to date. Following biodiversity will be generally the ESG, the environment, social and governance reporting, how farmers and what they produce impacts the world. Farmers, we believe, can no longer afford to stick their head in the sand about this topic, although a lot of farmers would just wish this would all piss off and they could go back to business as usual. So we've got an important role to play in educating and motivating farmers, because incentives, or the carrot promotion of get rich through carbon farming, that phase is finished, and now the stick is coming in as well as the carrot, and that is you're going to have to report on the emissions related to your production. So we're all on that journey, and we propose to be the farmers' trusted partner and help them identify what their CO2 emissions are, what the opportunities on farm are, help them to invest in their on-farm projects, certify the outcomes, and then sell into these agriculture and climate markets. So how do we do that? Well, we do that through landscape impact programs, which are collective, open transactions, which involve multiple farmers across multiple farms, across the fences, across the landscape. So how do these happen? Well, in the Traprock, it started with a kick-off meeting where we proposed to an existing group of farmers, the Traprock group, who is 30 years old. They formed out of the previous Wool Growers Association. We talked to them about how going it alone is difficult, but if you collectivise, it can make some benefits. We talked, at that point about who would like to participate in as either pilot farmers, a group of 10, or in the working team. And then we started the process of the Landscape Impact Program, which is a major co-design process where we work with the farmers to discover what can you do and deliver in your landscape that has both an environmental and an economic impact. And importantly, you don't want to launch a transaction at a point in time. You want to create a transaction which is open and enables other farmers across that landscape to join over time and benefit from the work that was done throughout the Landscape Impact Program in making it smoother. So here we kicked off with a community session. This is a bunch of the pilot farmers and the working team. The working team consists of 5 roles, and these roles are paid roles for the Landscape Impact Program. They're paid $50 an hour for 4 hours a week. And for each role, they've got specific functions. So the Regen advisor, their role is to kind of understand, well, what are the economic and environmental trade-offs of certain interventions? The cat herder gets the right people at the right place at the right time. The business management role is about understanding the financial impacts individually and collectively and what that transaction looks like. The farmer avatar is to keep the bastards honest and make sure that it works for farmers. And the communications role, we've got multiple community sessions plus a field day. Plus you want to come out at the end with outputs like a information pack, an onboarding process. And so the communications role is about making sure that what's discovered through the Landscape Impact Program makes sense to farmers and can be easily communicated, not just to farmers, but to the other interested stakeholders. We use a whole bunch of tools during the Landscape Impact Program, not just those 5 people in the working team, but we look at the circles of influence, the other stakeholders in the region. We use a process called the 4 returns framework, which looks at returns on a financial capital, natural capital, social, and inspirational capital basis. Now, the way it works, you'd have a kickoff, you onboard 10 pilot farmers, and in that process, you're gathering data, and that data helps inform the working team. We pull out big maps, which fortunately SQL was able to provide. We stand around a table, and that's co-design session 1, looking at the impacts that could be done, where the farmers are located, and what sort of findings did we find during that onboarding. Then we go out into the field and we actually test and measure, what we think might be interventions. Could they work in the field? What are the best regenerative agricultural landscapes that are in this region, and how do we replicate them across the region? Session 2, we sit there with farmers. So in the Traprock, we bought philanthropic capital in the form of WWF, financial capital and the banking sector with CBA, and elders came representing the supply chains. And then the farmers could have a dialogue between, well, this is what we're thinking of doing, and the investors could share, well, these are the sorts of things that we're after. And then there's a full discussion about, well, what are the measurement, verification, and reporting requirements to satisfy the farmers and the cost requirements of the transaction, but also to satisfy stakeholders, banks, and other stakeholders. Between session 2 and session 3, there's a lot of work done creating and documenting the tools that are used for the transaction and coming up with the term sheet. Session 3 is the launch of the open transaction. So what sort of scale and efficiencies did we find? Within the Traprock, what we found was that actually the pre-clearing before Europeans, there was loads of box gum grassy woodlands, and that was home to koala, quoll, Regen honeyeater, swift parrot, all of which are now threatened endangered species and sit on the endangered species list. What we found was that unmanaged forest can be too thick and, may not have agricultural benefits because the canopy prevents light. The trees themselves, if they're thin and multiple, prevent stock movement. In the cleared area, your grass can grow, but the lack of trees means, particularly in the Traprock with low nutrient cycling and shitty soils, you need those trees to cycle up from deeper areas the nutrients that are below. Also, trees provide fantastic cover for hawks and eagles, which tend to take lambs, which has a direct impact on productivity. So actually, open, well-managed boxgum grassy woodlands have the potential to provide higher productivity than cleared land and unmanaged forest, and high biodiversity outcomes that provide for natural outcomes like restoration of the threatened ecological community, which is boxgum grassy woodlands, and the species that call that home. We're fortunate that this idea of landscape impact programs is popular. Our next one is in Tasmania on the North Esk Irrigation Scheme. We have 6 funded across Victoria through philanthropy. is in conjunction with Landcare Victoria, ANU Sustainable Farms, and our big brother in this, in a global scale, the Landscape Finance Lab. Overall, we see that actually these landscape impact programs are the path to market. It's very difficult to work with farmers one-on-one and scale the support services that they need. However, when you start with 10 farmers and your ambition is to grow to 100 or 200 in the same region and have them join an open transaction, it gives you the capacity to bring on lots of farmers. So let's talk specifically about the Traprock Landscape project and what they called Flourishing Fur, Feathers, Forests, Families and Farms. As I mentioned, it centres around this threatened ecological community. So in the background behind Andy Ferrier and Andy Finlay there is an open box gum grassy woodlands. And what Andy Finlay is describing is this is precisely the place that he puts the ewes when they're lambing, because the pasture has the best nutrient density. The trees provide protection for the lambs and the ewes during this critical stage of their development. Now, contrary to popular belief, actually trees and grass don't always compete for limited water availability. There's an optimum amount of trees for that cycling of nutrients, for that increased productivity and pasture improvement, and for the biodiversity outcome. One of the things that we worked out with the farmers in the Traprock during that co-design was that not all of the ERF methods are applicable in the Traprock. So actually culling some of them out and helping them to identify, well, what are the methods that are relevant to us, and what is the data that we need to gather in order to understand which methods we would be working with in that context. And for the threatened ecological community of these open woodlands, you've either got greater than 20% canopy cover, which enables you to get into the ERF market for avoided clearing, or you've got less than 20% cover and you're trying to regenerate that through activities such as reduction of grazing during the growth period. So you're out of that field for 5 months in the first 5 years until those recruited saplings can themselves grow to greater than 2 meters in height and get a projected cover greater than 20%. And that enables you to use either the HIR or the NFMR regrowth process. As I mentioned, we are about the farmers and we're about regenerative agricultural outcomes. And whilst it might mean that farmers are, for the first 5 years, restricted in their grazing for 5 months of the year, the resulting open box gum grassy woodlands has better pasture. And so the trade-offs are actually in favour of productivity for creating this type of landscape. We're not asking farmers to take a hit. We're asking them to extend that type of environment that Andy Finlay has from his 30-year-old stand of box gum grassy woodlands and recreate that over the next 25 years and recreate it over time. So usually you've got forest and you're sealing in a 20-metre range, and every 5 years you can seal in another 20-metre range. So over time, with an open transaction, you can bring on more farmers, but additionally, each farmer can increase the area of well-managed open box gum grassy woodlands, which has both a carbon and a biodiversity and a productivity benefit. So we had to do things like help farmers to understand, well, what qualifies as box gum grassy woodlands? You know, we need to know that it's 20 mature trees per hectare or greater. We need to know that it consists of 14 to 20 or greater C4 grasses, forbs, and other plants. And if they qualify, that enables it to be box gum grassy woodlands. And so giving farmers the tools to go out and self-assess what land fits in, what land doesn't. And that helps us to do land assessment and understand the relative value of land. So within a carbon estimation area, what's box gum grassy woodlands, what's derived native grasses, what's rem veg in the CADX, and what exists in other ecosystems like riparian zones, etc. Adjacent to the carbon estimation area and unattached, because there's different values attached to the proximity and the connectivity that you can give the wildlife that will call this habitat home. There's also the question of scale. So individually, you know, there's like 7,000 farms, maybe even less in Australia, that earn $2 million a year or more. 100,000 farms earn between 50,000 and 2 million a year. And these are our target farmers. They don't have the resources and they don't have the scale necessarily to go into carbon projects on their own. And so the role of the mutual, being member owned, is sometimes to be a proponent on behalf of the farmers so that collectively we have the scale to make the economics work for the project. And, you know, simple things like in an ANRU account, which is the account that you get when you're through the ERF process, you actually need to get to 2,000 ACCUs before you can ka-ching any of them. That means sell them or retire them. And on your own, in a low carbon, high biodiversity environment like the Traprock, that was going to take farmers sometimes up to 17 years before they hit that 2,000 ACCU threshold. Coming together with us as the proponent, collectively we can hit that 2,000 ACCU threshold in the first few years, and that enables the collective to retire their carbon credits for carbon neutrality of their commodities and or trade and sell these. And working for our farmer members, you know, we give those farmers the capacity to choose. What are you going to do with your proportion of those carbon credits? Are you going to become carbon neutral? Are you going to trade them for an additional income stream? And the other thing that aggregation allows us to do is to smooth out the cash flows so that from year one, they're generating income and they don't have years, particularly in the establishment of HIR and NFMR, you're talking about going from not forest to forest, which can take 5 to 7 years before you're generating ACCUs, and you've got all those costs up front, including fencing, measurement, verification and reporting. And that cost pressure to get into an ERF project is really difficult for most farmers. So by smoothing out the cash flow, we enable farmers to have a predictable cash flow at an individual level, and also make sure that they've maintained money at the end of their project to continue to meet their measurement, verification and reporting requirements. You know, critically, an output from the Landscape Impact Program is a participant information pack, and it's designed to enable somebody who wasn't in the co-design to pick up a plain language document and understand what the heck it is that we're doing collectively and get an FAQ, get their questions answered. Now, I'm wondering, you could probably need a break from hearing me talk, so I'm going to quickly play the video of one of the farmers, one of the key farmers.
This is probably Mallow. I've been here since 1992, and we've converted it from just raw merino sheep into organic lamb production. And in doing that, I've become really interested in biodiversity and the health of the landscape. I've now become interested in what Regen Farmers can offer us as a group and as a district. So if we've got, say, 8 properties in the pilot group that we're working with now. So they're like little stepping stones in the district. So we've got them and we'll map them and we'll put them together. But the idea is then to expand that out. Development of the benefit for the environment that we can do with that is just unbelievable. There's hotspots of these, you know, biodiversity threatened species areas here. To try to get some connectivity is just going to be so important. So back in the early 1990s, we put together a group called the Traprock Wool Association. That was put together when the wool industry was falling apart. But that group, Traprock Group as it's called now, is still in existence, and it's got over 60 members, active members in there, and it's what it's given the landholders is confidence to be part of a project like this. So as a group, we've been talking to SQL, they're the local NRM group, and we're dealing, through Regen Farmers, and we've been looking for markets because we know we've got the product here. We've got a heap of product, but we need to be able to assess it. We need to be able to monitor it. We need to be able to verify what we've got, report on all that, and then sell it. Different ones here. These grasses. There's a little daisy. So yeah, that's just part of the assessment process. It's quite comprehensive, but it's what we're looking to do in the future.
Thank you, Andy. So how's all this work? Critically, we help each farmer with onboarding. A Regen advisor in the local area, sets up an onboarding of through video conference. They create a digital twin, which is a digital replication or image of their farm. It includes the map, it includes the data. We help them to understand, well, what are your on-farm emissions and what are the opportunities that you've got on farm, remembering that already we've kind of refined the opportunities to avoided clearing or HIR and FMR. And so it becomes a very streamlined process. And then we work with them, the next stage to understand, well, from the GIS information, what's the extent of your carbon estimation area? You go in there, you check that what is on the ground is reflected in those digital maps. You can, with these methods all being not soil carbon, they're full cam methods, so you can interrogate that land parcel and from the get-go understand, well, what is the carbon that you're going to sequester over the next 25 years? That's called your forward abatement estimation. And from that, you can pull together a financial model. Because you know the carbon, but you don't know the price, you can make assumptions on price based on, conservative, probable, or optimistic values. And then we're able to offer the farmers investment into their farm to build fences, to do the MVR, to plant trees if trees are appropriate. And we'll lend the farmers up to 25% of their forward abatement estimation, which enables us to, have confidence that whether the price stays at where it is today or goes up, which is largely expected, the farmer will have the ability to retire their loan and still have more than enough carbon to satisfy usually their own emissions requirements so that they can ship commodities that are carbon neutral. And if after they've retired their loan and looked after their own needs, they still have surplus carbon, they've got the choice to inset that with their supply chains who are buyers for carbon so that they can pay for, trucks and transport and energy within their larger business, or to sell it to the offset market, which are the polluters and those that have to, remove carbon from their businesses because they're also, having to report Scope 3 emissions, Scope 2 emissions, and Scope 1 emissions from the 1st of July 2024. So as mentioned, we've got that onboarding project, onboarding product that helps farmers down this process. It's not cost prohibitive to find out whether you've got an opportunity, is about $800. In the Traprock, it's a further $3,100 from the farmer's hip pocket. So just a fraction over $4,000 out of the farmer's pocket to know how much they could be loaned in order to participate in these projects. And of course, coming together helps the farmers pay for the landscape impact program. So in the Traprock, by having that kickoff meeting, we were able to go to the LRF, which is a Queensland only fund, but we were then able to get the 100K together to run the landscape impact program. We've also found that these landscape impact programs, that we've currently in the final stages. We've got through the EOI and we're putting in our full application for 4 of these across New South Wales in the Upper Clarence, the Northern Rivers, Southern Tablelands and Western Murray. We've got 6 of these in Victoria, funded again this time through philanthropy, through the Ian Potter Foundation, and that one in Tasmania where it's funded by philanthropy, but we're looking to get Tassie Irrigation to fund a second one in Tasmania so that we can do a cohort and have some efficiencies there. In terms of reporting, clearly investors need reporting. The way we look at it is if you're trying to do something in the landscape, you can't do it without the farmers. This is our sort of egg diagram. The yolk, if you want, is the Landscape Impact Program, which we run, which helps identify what's in it for the farmer stakeholders. But sitting around other landscape stakeholders, that's your national parks, your state parks, your existing forests, your Indigenous landholders, your local council, all of these landholders also impact on the landscape. And if we can coordinate what the farmers are doing with these other stakeholder groups, well, then you can get a greater for returns outcome. We work with improvement across those 4 returns. And we enable through those digital twins that we provide to farmers when they onboard, the ability for them to, say, report how their commodities are being produced against the Australian Agricultural Sustainability Framework and against those 4 returns. We have an MOU in place with the Landscape Finance Lab. A guy called Paul Chatterton left WWF and TNC to create the Landscape Finance Lab. He literally wrote the 4 returns handbook, and Landscape Finance Lab is our global partner and part of the Victorian Landscape Impact Program with Landcare Victoria. They're loving our work as a result of getting farmers engaged. They're seeing that as like a beachhead that then enables them to gather the other stakeholders and support what the farmers are doing, but knowing that the farmers are catalytic to this, and you can't make a landscape impact without the farmers. I'm getting close to the end, I promise. Maybe I am at the end. Certainly my slides aren't moving. We'll call that the end. So I'm going to stop sharing and ask if there's any questions. Rachel, how did I do for time?
Well, we're a little bit over, but I'd still love to allow some questions. So does anyone have a question for Wardy about the project, or indeed for Andrew McCartney about the project and SQL's role? I've got a couple of questions, but I'm going to let others have their go first. So if anyone has a question, just feel free to unmute and ask your question. Okay, since nobody's put their hand up or unmuted yet, I'm going to ask my first question. So in terms of the biodiversity that you're generating through the project, are you trying to sell, will landholders be trying to sell that as for biodiversity certificates or something as well? Or are they mainly focused on the sort of carbon part at the moment?
So at the moment, the biodiversity market's still very immature, but we know that it's coming. There are biodiversity only funds in Europe and they're being replicated around the world. But within the Traprock, which is in Queensland, is the Land Restoration Fund, and they enable you to sell biodiversity as a co-benefit, but it has to be anchored in a carbon project. The Traprock's not applicable for huge amounts of carbon. So it is a low carbon, high biodiversity environment. So you need that carbon in order to attach the biodiversity benefits. And you're, as a farmer, you're selling both the carbon and the biodiversity. And in the aggregation, we have some farmers that don't qualify for any of the carbon methods. They're biodiversity only. And so they're piggybacking off the shoulders of the farms that are in the aggregation that do have carbon. And so we've got some farmers that aren't able to enter into the carbon markets, but really have some value to be created for the landscape, and they get rewarded for the biodiversity contribution that they're making.
So what's the mechanism for them to get rewarded for the biodiversity?
So the box gum grassy woodlands, if they've got extent of that currently, what we look at is the pre-clearing extent and then the CAT-X overlay. So CAT-X is the rights to clear that. And we say, well, if you're going to protect that, you can earn between $60 and $75 per hectare by not chopping it down, by controlling the weeds, by, controlling the feral animals. And then additionally, if you can regenerate what was cleared land and prove that it becomes box gum grassy woodlands, and the interventions are largely the same as you would need for HIR or NFMR, but you might not qualify for whatever reason for HIR and NFMR, well, then each new hectare that you're creating of additional box gum grassy woodlands, that's looking at something like $350 up to maximum sort of like $500-600 per hectare for that. And once it's established as box gum grassy woodlands, it now goes into the pool of protect rather than regenerate carbon, and so it adds more hectares that are going to get that $60 to $75 per hectare. I hope that answered. Was that clear? So, like, depending if they've got forest or not. If they've got forest, you can protect it. If they don't, you're regenerating it to become forest.
Yeah, sorry. I suppose, but I thought that was more for the carbon projects. But if you don't have any, if you're not eligible under any of the methods under the ERF, then sorry, where's the hectare amount coming from? Because that you wouldn't, then you also wouldn't be eligible for LRF projects.
No, well, see, the LRF project eligibility will be when we submit for the third round of the LRF, the first project where it's an aggregated proponent. So
okay, right. It doesn't matter.
Yeah, up to we're the proponent, right? So the farmer is negotiating with Regen Farmers Mutual, and Regen Farmers Mutual is the proponent to the LRF. So in aggregate, we can sweep up all the biodiversity with farmers that have got carbon and farmers that don't have carbon.
Right, okay, yep, I get it now. Right, so that's great. So it enables people essentially to participate in carbon that aren't generating any carbon under the methodologies.
Yes.
Right. Okay, fantastic. Andrew McCartney, did you want to add something around what your role and what the benefits have been for SQL to the story?
Thanks, Rachel. I guess from our perspective, this stuff intersects perfectly with the purpose of our company. We're all about flourishing landscapes. We're about the future. I guess that no one's going to argue that the carbon economy is alive and well. It is our future that we're looking at. We're all trying to work out our place in it. While some things are clear, as already mentioned, some of the market areas are still maturing. We felt that this was a good opportunity for us to learn our way into those things. We have some base skills and capacity in the company that could make a contribution here, but we've seen this very much as a learning activity, and to discover, how we might as a company move forward in this whole space. It's one of the things we're looking at. It's obviously not the only thing, but I guess from our perspective, it was important to be involved with something that was local, it was, that fitted the ethos and the purpose of our organisation, and also provided that really good and real world learning opportunity. So, yeah, we're happy to have played that role when starting to identify some opportunities where we might be able to capitalise on the attributes that we have, being, obviously a not-for-profit, a social enterprise, if you like, and that we have, that allows us to have that independent third-party objective assessment stuff. We're evidence-based, science-based. So we think that, there could be opportunities in that space for us to play a role in the future.
Thanks very much. Claire Parks has got a question.
Hello, hi Waddy. Good to see you guys are having a you're building your impact. That's great. This is another question for Andrew. So what's the relationship between SQL and Regen Farmers Mutual? Is there any contractual relationship, or you're just there to facilitate? Or it sounds like the Traprock group is fairly self-directed and self-organising. But what's the actual nuts and bolts of your role?
Well, it's more of it's an open partnership at the moment. We're looking to shift it up a notch now that we've been through the first stage and done some learning. So that's we're in discussions, I guess you'd say, with Regen Farmers Mutual and Traprock based on some of the areas that they think and we think we might be able to contribute to. But I guess we've had more just an MOU at the moment, isn't it, Wardy? That we're operating on. And I guess the reality is that we've co-invested a significant amount of money in, from our perspective, which is mainly time of our people, of our specialists. But we've taken a very clear decision that investment was well worth it for the learning opportunity for our business. It's starting to pay real dividends now, helping us get a much better idea of how we might fit into things in the future, particularly in this area, but also how we might approach other aspects that relate to environmental markets.
Yeah, cool. Because I think it's different in New South Wales in local land services because we're government. We've got a whole lot of procurement rules and partnership rules that make it a bit hard for us to just jump headlong into these type of partnerships and that facilitation of aggregations and things like that. So
appreciate that. We have a very proactive, thoughtful board who have approved the investment we've made in this area. So we've gone in very much eyes open to the extent that you can, but we've also appreciated that there's always an element of risk, but it was judged by the board and the CEO to be very acceptable risk, and it's proven that way. So we're really pleased with the partnership that we have, and we're looking forward to the discussions that are coming out of it now about how all this stuff might fit together on a longer term basis, that we can play in an area that is relevant to our company. I guess one of the other things to mention, because we are a profit for purpose business, that we mainly operate in a little bit similar way to government in market failure areas. We don't set out intentionally to compete with private sector businesses that are already there and functioning. We see we play a role in this early development, and we want to stay ahead of that curve. So that's, I guess, is the challenge that we're thinking about now, is how we're going to maintain that. We also, at some point, need to start recuperating some money. But we're also conscious that until the business model is refined to a point where you can do that, it's you've got to be careful you don't muck the business model up, I suppose. But the business model also needs to support some, not just cost recovery, some margin as well. We don't know how far away that is, by the way.
Thank you.
You go, Woody.
Yeah, if you don't mind, Claire, what we've found with, we're not through the PIPAP process, but PIPAP has expressed to us that we're different to most carbon service providers who might intermediate between farmers and government because of that mutual structure where the farmers are the owners of the company limited by guarantee on a one member, one vote basis. So they can find it easier to provide money and support to farmers as opposed to providing it to a private company that claims to have farmers as customers. The other thing I would also say is there's there's two phases. The first phase of support through the Landscape Impact Program has been like GIS information, understanding what the NRM goals were so that we could make the Landscape Impact Program kind of achieve those objectives. So not much of a financial, certainly no payments to us, right, as a mutual. So it was a collaboration, right? And then going forward, there's sometimes the farmers need an ecologist or a suitable scientist from the NRM to come out, and so the farmers are paying the NRM for services ongoingly. And sometimes the investors need a third party to qualify that what they've paid for is actually happening on the ground, and they can't rely on the farmers or us as an aggregation of the farmers to do it. So the proposed business model post landscape impact program, and when there's an open transaction, is that the NRM gets fee for service direct from the farmers or direct from the investors. And so that's the way they recuperate the investment in the program phase and cover their costs plus a bit of margin or whatever their margin needs to be in order to operate.
Thanks, Wardy. Do we have any other questions? If we don't, we might move on just because we are running a little bit short of time. But thank you so much for your presentation, Wardy. That was fantastic, and I'll look forward to sharing it with others that weren't able to be here today. And thanks also very much, Andrew McCartney, for your insights and really articulating the role that you guys have played in the project so that we can all understand it from the NRM perspective. So thanks a lot.